you make some new friends. My name is David Wong. I'm your host and moderator for today. A very warm welcome to all of you to the BNP Business Forum today. We'll have great fun. Today, I just made some new friends here. We have a couple here all the way from Johor Bahru just to attend this Business Forum. Some friends from the Philippines and some friends from Thailand are here with us. Special welcome, Sawadika. I don't know how to say it in Philippines. Mabuhay. Selamat. Ni hao. Now our forum is titled Integrity or Success Can We Have Both? It seems to imply that success and integrity are mutually exclusive. Or is it difficult to have both in the context of doing business in Malaysia? You know, the transparency, international issues, CPI, corrupt perception index every year to countries and territories. And they score the countries by out of 100, how the higher the score, the least corrupt you are. And they also rank the country. In 2004, Malaysia was ranked 39. That means the 39 least corrupt. But 10 years later, in 2014, Malaysia is ranked number 50. Number 52, rather, sorry. And Singapore, our neighbor, is ranked number 7. And we only scored 52 out of 100. We just made it. So is it easy to have success with integrity in Malaysia? And that's what we're going to speak to. And today we are very privileged to have two very most qualified, but more importantly, two very credible speakers on this topic. I know Dr. Nehemiah for a long time. He's the only businessman I know who carry a business card that says, explicitly state, we do not give bribes. That's cool, right? And then Yang Roman, Dr. Kian belongs to the political organization that is committed to CAT, that is competency, accountability, and transparency, committed and practicing CAT. Right? So it's a privilege to have these two distinguished speakers with us here today. But just before we start, before I introduce them more, let's just look at the schedule. We would have Dr. Chee, Nehemiah. You know him, I keep calling him Dr. Nehemiah to speak to us for about 15 minutes, followed by Dr. Kian, and then we'll have a panel discussion, and we'll field some questions, and then you'll have a chance to also ask questions from the floor. Right? So let me first introduce to you the first speaker, Dr. Nehemiah. Dr. Nehemiah is a business of Nehemiah Construction. Nehemiah was a general manager of a company for many years, and he decided to quit because he faced pressure to compromise his ethics, and he took all his savings, he started his own company, and then he lost everything. But now after 20 years or so, he has 18, 19 years of profit year on year to show. And he is a testimony that you can succeed in business without compromising your integrity. He won the Ernst & Young Award of Entrepreneur of the Year Award and other accolades. But not just because of his business acumen and his ability, but more so impressively, he won it because of his integrity. Success with integrity. So ladies and gentlemen, would you join me to welcome on stage Dr. Nehemiah Lee.
Thank you, David, for your kind introduction. I think I've summarized my talk already. I don't really need to say much. It's an honor and delight to be invited to share with you my journey briefly. The title I was given is Integrity or Success, Can We Have Both? And since today we have invited two speakers, one from business background and the other from political background, I will rephrase the title to Can the Business Succeed Without Compromising Integrity? Narrow down onto a perspective of business. And after looking at this title, I still feel that it's too wide for 15 minutes cover. Success is, personally, I think it's a multifaceted and quite broad concept. And integrity also is very wide. But I will further narrow it down to, can the business make money? Money is just perhaps not the best yardstick for success, but it is the easiest to measure. So I'll narrow it down to, can the business make money? And integrity, I confine it to just the issue of bribery. So I will focus only on, can the business make money without bribery? Well, as you already heard from David, I answer is yes, with the qualification, by God's grace, it is possible. It's very tough, and our Christian definition of grace means undeserved favor, and I have many times received favor from God, which I don't deserve. And because of God's favor, I managed to make money for business. This is the financial results of the past 21 years, since we started business in 1993. And that is the first year where you see it's negative, very small negative. And until 2013, anything above the x-axis is positive. It's not a big business, but it's, I think, to be able to make a company profitable without bribery is, to me, I'm not really a good businessman, I'm an engineer. To me, it's a miracle. And I want to qualify again, it's strictly by God's grace. I'm not really a very good businessman, or at least when I first started. Now, after 20 years, I have 20 years of experience as a business person. God's favor was upon me, even though I wasn't really deserving. Just to give you some idea, in case some of you do not know what business I'm in. The background picture is that of flyover, and the hexagonal shaped precast concrete panel wall is the retaining wall that I am building in the construction industry. So, in fact, I branded it as the Nehemiah wall. When I first started, I want people having even difficulty in pronouncing the name of the company. What's the name of the company? Nehemiah. They don't even know what we are, what business we are in, what we are selling. So I said, no. The way we pronounce should be Nehemiah. Nehemiah. So that's when they begin to know what business I'm getting into. Is integrity an asset or a liability? It's quite a difficult question to answer. I would say that it is a liability, actually in the short term. I'll explain why. But in the long term, it's an asset. The short-term advantages of corruption, quite a lot. It's a shortcut to approval from authority. A lot of things need approval. And if you just pay some money, you save a lot of time and headache. And sometimes it's almost like impossible to get approval, even though you submit everything that is necessary. Yeah. Tax evasion, very common practice, especially among industry. You look at companies, such a lot of companies losing money, but actually they drive big cars, they have big houses. Because they run away tax, charging bills and kind of things like that. So this is corrupt practice. But instead of money go to the government, they put it in their own pocket. So this is another way of making money as well. And securely, all the biggest common practice is, of course, pay in order to secure a contract. And of course, bureaucratic process can be very tedious. For example, we went to India, we just want to even open a company or open a bank account. Theoretically, it's in 4 weeks. It takes 6 months. Because we just refuse to pay back. And that's all. Eventually, they give up on us and send everything. Approaching them. That why? What's the problem? They give an problem, we furnish it, we give an problem, furnish it, until we eventually got through. But slow, very slow. So if you want a quick success, it's a disadvantage. Integrity is a liability. Unfortunately, we have to say that. And even when we finish the project, we don't get paid for the work completed. The people who can put a stranglehold on payment that is supposed to get. And again, if you can pay some money, you speed up the process and you get the money. And you have cash flow problem. Really, the pressure is tremendous as well. And the temptation to living is strong because corruption, unfortunately in Malaysia, is the low risk but high intervention. If you get caught, slap on the wrist, maybe transferred to another place, or some of the politician become ambassador somewhere. Whatever you've gotten wealth, don't have to pay back on. Whatever the past is forgotten, don't have to pay back. You make the money, you just go away. And if you don't get caught, you continue making your money. So the temptation to give is tremendous. But as a Christian, what does the Bible say? Just give you, there are many scripture references about bribery and corruption. Just to show you one from Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 19. You shall not pervert justice. You shall not show partiality. You shall not take a bribe. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous. Justice, and only justice, you shall follow. See, the root problem of corruption and bribery is not to do with the issue of justice. And we know God is the God of justice. So when we bribe, we are involved in the perversion of justice. We just subvert the cause of righteousness. And that's how insidious, how heinous corruption is. So as a Christian, if you read this verse and you know that God is a God of justice and God of righteousness, how can you compromise on this issue? But thanks be to God, there are long-term advantages of integrity. But you must have the stamina to reap the fruits of integrity. One is trust. And you see, one of the virtues of Chinese business actually is trust. Those olden days, your word is your bond, you based on your trust. And actually, trust speeds up a lot of things. So when you build trust, people trust you, people are happy to give project in the morning and then you deliver on time within budget and your price is reasonable. And what you say, you deliver. What you say, what you promise, you keep your promise. That builds trust. And that is the advantage. And of course, you don't have to price in the cost of production. What you see is what you can. No, I don't have to mark up. X dollar is a contract. I don't have to mark up extra in order to keep that to pay somebody's pocket. So our price is very competitive. And the good companies always do this. And the lousy bad companies stay away from because they got nothing from this. But in a way that's good. It automatically weeding process. I also prefer not to deal with those lousy companies, and usually they also other problems, not so technically completed, not so professional, they don't pay on time, a lot of things. The good companies are the ones actually we have to deal with. So by not involved in corrupt practice, this helps us actually the weeding process on a negative trace. And our accounts are clean. Of course, earlier years we are not so professional. In fact, I don't see Singapore here. It's not my finance manager. It's actually not sent to give his help. He can testify that we our accounts. And of course, short-term wise, like I told you, you can make a company lose money, you will pay tax, it's a short-term advantage. But your company doesn't look good at all. And we have been offered to buy our companies by a multinational company. And they give us good value for our money, for the company. I mean, my friends are surprised, wow, how come you get such good offer? Because the accounts are clean, they trust the account and they look at the record. Whereas if year in and year out, your account shows losing, which company want to buy your company? So those are some of the long-term advantages. And of course, we have to work very hard. Because we know that there is we cannot use a shortcut. We cannot make things easier by paying money. So we have to work a lot harder. We have to be more responsible to the requirement. We have to be lean and mean. We have to be tighten our belt to make sure that our price is competitive. We have to give good service, professionally sound system that we provide. But that's good for us. The politician or whoever, your godfather that help you to make your company make money, they come and go. But we don't depend on them. The bad time comes, actually, these are the companies which has gone through the tough way to survive. But the next question is, would we have grown bigger, faster, and more successful? I would have to admit it. Yes, we would have, but at the price of compromising protection. The temptation is great. I see my friend, Tom, he can lease his company in 3 years, shortest possible time. Our 20 years already still struggling to see whether we can meet the requirement for this. And we work very hard. So, but I imagine when I see the Lord meeting face to face, it's not worth it. What am I going to tell my God, the Lord, when I'm meeting face to face? And that is to me a very important question. So let me just share with you from Psalm 73. I can identify along with him. And David says, but as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my freedom. I almost gave in to temptation. The temptation is so strong. So little risk. The return is so good. That is the corrupt practices in Malaysia. Verse 3, for I envy the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked, they have no struggle. They don't seem to have struggle. Their bodies are healthy and strong. In fact, now I'm having my bronchitis. I wasn't sure that I can come and share with you the story. But they seem to be healthy and strong. And verse 5, they are free from common human burdens. They are not plagued by human ills. And I'm a member of Kian Club. At the age of 60 now, and they should be a member there. With God's blessing and His blessing by the I see people coming with luxurious cars, very sporty, very expensive car, and look at his age, 30 something. And I saw him at about 3 something in the afternoon, no? This guy don't have to work. And then his body is healthy, I think he go to the gym regularly. I envy him. So they seem to have a good part of the life. Verse 12, this is what the wicked are like. Always free of care, they go on amazing wealth. Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and I have washed my hands in innocence. I'm wasting my time. And when I try to understand all this, it troubled me deeply. Till I entered the sanctuary of God. Then I understood the final destiny. Surely you place them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly are they destroyed? Completely swept away. So when I read this, I could really identify, and thankfully God let me see what the reality is. Of course, God also gives some encouragement. Not always hard, tough life struggle. This is one example of encouragement. Out of the blue, out of nowhere, I was invited to submit an application. I just filled it up. And to my surprise, I didn't win an award, but I was at least one of the top nominees for Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award for 2 years. And that's my wife and me. I had to leave to stand up just to introduce herself. She well deserved the award as well, not just me. In fact, and my team as well. We will walk together. It's not a one-man show. Although the award normally is one person. And in 2011, SOBA, which is Star newspaper, outstanding newspaper, I think CEO Peter, he won even earlier than he got the award Entrepreneur of the Year. In that year, he won, he got the number 1, I was second. Next year, he competed in his chance to win. So these are some like encouragement from the Lord, but the last one is really kept it all. The heading says UK's ICE means Institution of Civil Engineers, UK, award Malaysia's no bribes men. And it says believed to be the first Malaysian to be conferred the award. Dr. Lee's contribution is that of creating a narrative in the Asian construction market of being successful in business without bribery. He was selected on the basis of his integrity and professionalism in the development of homegrown Nehemiah retaining wall system in Malaysia. And of course, again, this is very surprising to me. And again, I would say I don't deserve it, but by God's grace, because I look through the past recipients they give to people outside UK. This award is especially for people outside UK. And I looked at the previous recipients, these are all extraordinary, outstanding engineers. They either build some iconic structures around the world, or they are involved in some mega project that can transform the society. But for this year, 2013, I know if they judge me on that basis, I'm nowhere to be found. And for this year, I don't know why this is the change of criteria. They say that the criteria is select on the basis of integrity. So I think God has a very good sense of humor. He used the fools to confound the wise. He used an ordinary engineer to confound the outstanding engineer. And this is how God works. In Psalms 37, verse 25, it says, once I was young, and now I'm old, yet I have never seen the godly abandoned, or their children begging for bread. A lot of people, they say, cannot survive lah. I need to cari makan lah. So I need to run lah. But actually, if they are prepared not to survive, and I think their survival level is very high level. If they are prepared to survive at a much lower level, God's will promise that you will not be abandoned, you will not, your children will not be abandoned. Right? But what grace can be so magnanimous that it can bless many more folk. I showed this picture. The company is called Thumbprint. My good friend, his name is Tan Wah Fiong. His company is called Thumbprint. When he became serious in his walk with God, he decided to clean up his company. He has about 300 workers in his factory. And the workers, you talk to them about integrity, they don't understand. So we make it very simple. No lies, no cheats, no bribes, zero corruption. Everywhere in his factory he had this poster, even on his truck, he had this one. And for people like him, Isaiah 33:15 has this promise. Those who walk righteously and speak what is right, who reject gain from extortion and keep their hands from accepting bribe, who stop their ears against plots of murder and shut their eyes against contemplating evil. They are the ones who will dwell on the heights. These people who walk righteously, who don't accept right, they are the ones who will dwell on the heights, whose refuge will be the mountain fortress. Their bread will be supplied. Don't worry about the lack of supply of survival. And water will not fail. So lastly, I just like to share with you this song which I can identify very much because God has raised me up to more than I can. Just enjoy this song.
powerful. 15 minutes is just not enough. We don't have time to get into details, but we have time for a panel discussion and question. So on the table, there's a still a paper. You can write the question down and pass on to me, or pass on to one of the guys on the table, or you can always ask from the floor. Thank you, Nehemiah, for that very inspiring talk. It's just a little insight deep into what you're much more, because I know your story so well. You know, we're very privileged to have young Muhammad Kian with us. I have the privilege of met Kian's dad at a Chinese New Year lunch, and he told me that nowadays I have to make an appointment to see my son. He's so busy. So it is a tremendous privilege to have him here with us today. And Ming is the Member of Parliament for Sedang and the election strategies for DAP. And prior to joining politics, Ming was a lecturer at the Faculty of Economics and Political Science here in UCSI University. And before that, he was also a consultant with Blue Ocean Strategy and an associate consultant with Boston Consulting Group. So we are in for a treat. Kian is a very interesting and compelling presentation. Sit back, relax, and enjoy, and we're in for a treat.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to David for giving me this opportunity to share with you guys just some experiences and thoughts. Oops. It's also good to be back in UCSI. When I first came back from the US, Dr. Peter was kind enough to give me a job here. Forever grateful for that. It's good to see. It's good to see some old friends and also to meet some new ones. It's been a privilege being a member of Parliament. Many people ask me, do I regret it? I say no, because I think every moment is a learning moment, both the good and the bad, and even the bad can be turned into valuable lessons from God. And for today, I really like to share on this topic from the perspective of a politician. Of course, I'm in the opposition, so I can't say that I've had the experience of people coming to me with bags full of money, offering me to give them a contract and whatnot. So I can't say that temptation that I faced has been very big. But I think it's nonetheless important for us to think about how politics as a whole is a greater reflection of society, and also the question of integrity and success, which I think to me is a rather no-brainer. And I will show you why in my presentation in terms of explaining why I say so. I'm going to start my talk with a story of Tony Blair, someone whom I'm sure all of you are familiar with, but perhaps some more recent cases about Tony Blair which some of you may not know about. I'm going to talk about then some other Malaysian examples that you may be familiar with pertaining to this topic. And then thirdly, what's in the name? I would say that it's everything. Then fourthly, some thoughts on where do we compromise. And then finally, why I think reputation and by extension integrity is actually the most important thing that we have in life. Not just as businessmen, but probably as importantly, maybe even more importantly, as politicians. So Tony Blair, I think most of you, I would say all of you in this room have heard of him. His accomplishments: Prime Minister for 10 years in the UK, from 1997 to 2007. I was in the UK studying when he was Prime Minister, and always was somebody who you could see was sort of trying for leadership, not just in the UK but also at the international level. A very well-spoken person, very intelligent, graduate of Oxford University, lawyer, married to also a very successful lawyer, Shirley Blair. And he became prime minister at a time when the Conservatives have been in power for a long time. Margaret Thatcher, and after that John Major. And one of his major accomplishments was to lead New Labour to 3 successive general elections: 1997, 2001, and 2005. It wasn't an easy accomplishment. The struggles that they go through in terms of rebranding Labour into New Labour threatened the base of the party, many of whom were associated with the trade unions and the working class in the UK society. But he managed to overcome these obstacles, and by winning a larger pool of voters, especially from the middle classes, he was able to become Prime Minister, or stay as Prime Minister for 3 successive terms. He gave independence to the Bank of England. Some people would credit Gordon Brown with that as well. And then he also devolved power and created the General Assemblies in Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. Some people gave him at least some credit for overseeing the peace process in Northern Ireland, which has lasted to this day, despite the many challenges that they've had. Perhaps the largest and probably the biggest black spot on his record was his strong support for the United States in the war in Iraq. But I think other than that, many people would say that he's one of the most successful prime ministers in modern UK contemporary history. What happened then after he stepped down as prime minister? I think that's the part I want to focus on today. This is what he did. He set up 2 important organizations that had his name. The first was the Tony Blair Foundation. It's very similar to the Clinton Foundation in terms of doing good works, but more of his time was dedicated to Tony Blair and Associates, his own private consulting arm. Of course, I've been a former consultant myself, of course not to his level of prominence, but as a consultant, you can do a lot of things for good, and you can do a lot of things for bad as well. And on the whole, I would say that Tony Blair has used and perhaps abused his position as former Prime Minister of the UK. Firstly, for example, by giving advice to dictators. And not just good advice, but as you can see from this headline, Blair branded a disgrace for giving Kazakh dictator PR advice on massacre of civilians by his regime. He was seen as overly close with the President of Kazakhstan. Of course, our Prime Minister now has a relationship with Kazakhstan as well through his recently married daughter. And also giving advice to the Ukrainian president, sorry, not the Ukrainian president, to the president of Azerbaijan. You can see on the right-hand side. So this is one of the things which has stained him quite a bit in terms of giving advice to these dictators. And in return, getting a lot of money as a retainer, as a middleman to try to negotiate important contracts in these countries. He is also a high-priced consultant. In this particular case, related to Malaysia, one MPB funded 218,000 per month retainer to Tony Blair for being an advisor to Petro Saudi. For those of you who have been reading any major newspaper in Malaysia, you will of course know at least a little bit about the one MPB story. And when Nehemiah just now was sharing about 30-something-year-olds driving nice big cars and not working in the afternoon in KLGCC, I'm also thinking of a certain Rotan gentleman who's associated with one MPB who has made a lot of money. I think far more money than perhaps even some of the young people that step into KLGCC at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So this is something which Tony Blair has stayed with as well. And then he was given the responsibility of being the Middle East envoy to try to use his position and his experience as former PM to try to create peace in the Middle East. Of course, it is a tall task for anybody, any former or current politician. But because of the fact that there were accusations that he was having potential conflict of interest between Tony Blair and Associates in terms of at the same time as being Middle East envoy, negotiating contracts such as telco or telecommunications contracts with some of the regimes in the Middle East for companies that used his Tony Blair and Associates services for their own benefit. So you can see one of the newspapers saying, "Good riddance, Tony Blair, you've been tolerated as the Middle East envoy for far too long." That is on the professional front. Here, on the private front, Tony Blair loses cool after Economist grills him on rumors alleging Wendy Deng affair. For those of you who don't know Wendy Deng, she is a very famous person. Her story is also very famous. She worked her way up in terms of marriage and is the current spouse to Rupert Murdoch, one of the richest men in the world. And there were allegations that Tony Blair had an affair with Wendy Deng. And as a result of these allegations, Rupert Murdoch actually cut funding to his foundation. So the latest, of course, is this very honest evaluation by the Economist, entitled "The Lowliness of Tony Blair," where they gave quite a negative appraisal of his work in terms of his work in his capacity as the founder of Tony Blair and Associates, as well as Tony Blair Foundation. So why do I bring up the example of Tony Blair? I think he's been a very successful post-Prime Minister personality in terms of making tons and tons of money. Although I didn't put it up in the slides, some estimates say that he's worth anywhere from 50 to 100 million pounds. Right? This is a former Prime Minister who received a salary of far less than what President Obama is receiving, for example, as President of the United States. So he's achieved tremendous success, financial success. And I think from the financial standpoint, many people would see him as a success. But at what cost? I think for former politicians of his stature, the financial success is not a measure that most people would measure him by. What most post-presidents or post-prime ministers' careers are appraised by is how much do they use their reputations so that they can leverage on their reputations to do more good, to do good that they couldn't do as prime minister or as president for various reasons. And that is that's the example that I want to use to set the framework for my presentation today. That as politicians, our reputation, whether as current or former politicians, is the most important asset that we have. And I think that is something which businessmen should also take into account. I think Nehemiah has alluded to that very strongly in his presentation. I want to talk about other examples from Malaysia. Of course, Dr. Mahathir is always in the news these days criticizing Najib. And I think his reputation also needs to be examined from this standpoint. What has he done after becoming Prime Minister in terms of leveraging his position? Yes, I think he's done some notable things which should be commended, especially in terms of his war, his stance against the war in Iraq and also the war in Afghanistan. I think those are things which many people commend him for, even though some of us may not agree with some of his other international positions. But at the same time, can he totally absolve himself from what has happened in the past in Malaysia in terms of criticizing his successors, such as Abdullah Badawi, as well as our current Prime Minister, Najib. The other example which I'm more familiar with would be my parliamentary leader, Saudara Lim Kit Siang, Mr. Lim Kit Siang. People who are familiar with him call him Kit. Others would call him Mr. Lim. No Datuk, no Datukship, no Tan Sri-ship, no Tunship, no honorary doctorate, even though I think he's more deserving than many of the individuals who have received these accolades in Malaysia. He has, I think, survived the political scene for a long time. He has not enriched himself, even though I think there were probably many opportunities for him to. And I think he's someone that most Malaysians, even those who don't like him, would give a certain amount of credit for being very consistent in his positions over the years and wanting to stand up for a core set of values. And I've been privileged enough to work closely with him over the past, I would say, 4 or 5 years. And I found that he's someone who's very consistent and someone who is a man of great integrity and of great honesty as well in his dealings with people and dealings with people, whether they are important politicians or just a man on the street. The other example is someone who recently passed away, Ming, former Menteri Besar from 1990 until the recent general election. And I think as much as we disagree with some of his position on religious matters, I think there's no one who can deny this is a man who led a very simple life and who did not allow himself to be enriched, even though his position may have given him opportunities to do so. And even many of the Anglo politicians would give him credit and respect in terms of his stand on honesty and his simple ways of living. And this is one of the main reasons why Kelantan continued to be won by past, as long as he was Menteri Besar. Now that we have a new Menteri Besar, I'm not quite sure whether the same position holds. The last person, I just threw him in there, Lee Kim Yew. Since this session is being recorded, I don't want to say too much for fear of being sued. But the reason why I bring him up is because his biggest project, the mines, is in my constituency in Sri Kembangan. And I think those of you who have heard of or have had personal dealings with him as a businessman would know what I'm talking about. And I just want to stop there. You can ask me personal questions later. But yeah, I think the message is quite clear. Okay, when I mention these people and when I mention politicians, I really want to emphasize the issue of the reputation, in terms of what's in the name. John 14:13 says, I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. John 16:24, until now you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and now, and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. And earlier, Exodus 27, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. I think when it comes to appealing to the name of God, all of us as Christians know that there is power in the name of God, and that we do not use or abuse the name of God. We do not use the name of God lightly, and we definitely do not abuse the name of God. In the political realm, in the political scene, I've come to find that lending your name to a particular cause is actually very, very important in terms of your own reputation and also the reputation of the cause that you're lending your name to. So for example, if someone comes to me and tells me, look, I received instructions from Lim Guan Ning or Lim Kit Siang that they asked me to do X, Y, and Z. How would I react? Firstly, I would evaluate that person to get to see, does this person have the trust of Lim Kit Siang or Lim Guan Ning? Is he using or abusing the name of these people who I trust and I respect a lot? And if let's say, maybe for the first time, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but if they continue using or abusing these kind of privilege over time, what Nehemiah say, in the long run, this person will lose credibility. This is sort of like somebody who is coming to me saying that they are intermediaries or representatives of some higher authority or figure in, let's say, my own political party. Right? So that is one example. What happens if, let's say, Guan Ning or Kit Siang comes to me directly and say, look, I want you to help me at this particular point. And that actually happens much less than you may imagine. The reason why I've come to realize is that when these important people, in the political scene, so to speak, when they come to you with a request, I've come to realize that they don't come to you with a request lightly. They have evaluated on whether they need to use their positions to ask a favor of you. And this is something which it is very important for me to emphasize. Because if you continue to use that position to the people below you, so to speak, in a way that you start to realize it's not really that responsible. Over time, the strength of the command will lose its value. When I just before the 2013 general elections, I was offered a fellowship to go to Singapore to study, not to study, but to be a fellow at the institute there for about a year. It would have allowed me to write some articles, probably finish a book based on a thesis. And at that time, I knew that the general elections were coming, and I wanted to help out the party. But I was torn between these two choices: developing my own academic career or staying on to help the party. At that time, I did not have any aspirations, or never thought that I would be given a place to contest at the parliamentary level or at any level. But Kian said, "Look, why don't you stay back and help the party?" And he's not someone who gives advice lightly on these kinds of matters. And when I evaluated that advice, I realized that he's using his name to try to appeal to me to do something, and not something for him personally, but for the greater good of the party and perhaps also for the country. I think as well. And I think that is one of the reasons why I decided to stay back in Malaysia for that 1 year, and later on I made a decision to join the party, and after that I've become a member of parliament. So that is something which we really need to understand, that even if, let's say, as businessmen, perhaps we are not to the level of some of the big boys in this country, some of the big developers, perhaps Tan Sri Liu and Tan Sri Liao, all these big names, once you throw out this Tan Sri or this surname, you will know who we're referring to. But even as individual businessmen, or as a sort of like a new member of parliament like myself, when we lend our name to something, we really need to evaluate what we're lending our name to. And some of the short-term gains that Nehemiah was talking about just now will come at a long-term cost if we're not careful about how we allow our names to be used. Then the question comes, especially for politicians, and I guess for many businessmen as well. I know those are very lofty ideas that you have to aspire to, but we have to compromise, right? Where do we draw the line when it comes to compromising? I'm glad that Nehemiah, has no branch policy printed on his card, because that really shows the people that he's interacting with there's no line of compromise when it comes to bribe giving. And I think as politicians, the notion of compromising actually is, we should not even ask the question of where should we compromise or where should we draw the line. We should actually think about the question of reputation. We should actually question the possible impact of our decisions on our own personal reputation. We should think of the possible impact of the reputation on your company. And then we should think of the possible impact on the reputation of your family. I always think of my wife when I make certain decisions that are important. And all these things are just not something which impact ourselves alone. It is something which impacts our family members and also the company that we keep. And in the cases of the many business owners here, the companies that you started and the companies that you're part of. And then finally, the most important bit is think of the possible impact on the reputation on our job. If let's say a politician who is a prominent Christian, for example, is found to have compromised some of his principles, you can be sure that the larger world out there will play it up. Utusan Malaysia will try to find an angle to put it in something like ahli parlimen pembangkang yang beragama Kristian telah membuat sedemikian, something like that. Trust Utusan to be able to put those kinds of things in. Right, so this is actually something which is very serious and something that I think on, reflect on a lot. And I want to end by talking about somebody who's very famous in the investment community, Warren Buffett, where he reminds his top managers that reputation is everything. And these are a couple of quotes which I think we should bear with us, bear in mind with us as we walk along the journey of life. As I've said in the memos for more than 25 years, he writes in the latest report, where he, in his latest circulars that he sends out regularly to his investors, we can afford to lose money, even a lot of money, but we cannot afford to lose reputation, even a shred of reputation. And then it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you do things differently. And I think this is none more true in the political world, where you can have 5 minutes of fame for doing something really bad that undermines 20 years of hard work that you put in to build up your reputation as somebody who can serve the community in a way that is honest and with integrity. So I'd like to end with perhaps a personal quote, personal thought, which is, your reputation is inextricably linked with your integrity. And if you want to preserve your reputation, you have to preserve your integrity. So for me, integrity or success, I think you cannot have success if you do not have integrity. Thank you.
Wow, that's most interesting. As you were saying, the post-prime ministers' names who use their office position for good. The person that comes to mind straight away is Jimmy Carter. I'd like to invite the both speakers now up to the stage and join me here as we have a panel discussion. And if you would write a question, you can bring up here, and or you can ask directly from the mic. How about another round of applause for our speaker? You both took very different paths, one into business and the other into politics. And yet you both left cushy jobs to pursue a cause that is wholesome, altruistic, and integrity of purpose. Tell us what drives you, what is the thing that causes you to do that, what motivates you to do that?
I started business in 1993 when I went through a midlife crisis, and I sensed about calling me to go into the marketplace to be the light and salt. And because my previous experience, I encountered corruption, and I feel very comfortable with it. And being an employee, or even when I was a general manager of a public listed company, I found my decision can be overruled. So the only way that I can practice integrity is that I have the authority to make the final decision. So that's why I started the company. Even though it can be a very small company, but at least I'm responsible for it. If I did wrong, I'm responsible. I do right, I'm responsible. So actually, it was a call of God that I started my business.
I think for me, I've been following politics and been part of the sort of like political scene in the background, doing research for quite some time already. And there were a lot of issues that I found to be very important, which I wanted members of parliament to bring up. And no matter how much I persuaded or cajoled or tried to write about these issues in my own personal capacity, they wouldn't, I felt, getting highlighted enough. And many people in my social circle, I would say professionals, are very, very reluctant to go into politics for many reasons. I think you all would know some of those reasons. You're giving up a cushy job to take up a rather tactless task sometimes, getting complaints from residents and ungodly hours sometimes, and also the perception that politics is a very dirty business. So all these things actually made me think that, oh, if I'm just going to complain from the background, from the back, and if none of my peers are going to step up to the plate, then I think I will be doing an injustice or doing a disservice to myself and also perhaps the causes that I care about. And ultimately, that at the end of the day was what persuaded me to take the final step of joining politics, and then now I'm in a position that I'm in with no regrets whatsoever.
Most honorable, we support. Dr. Nehemiah, in your presentation you say that in the long term, integrity pays because you build trust, you can offer better pricing, and attract good companies to do business with you. What's your advice to quite a lot of young entrepreneurs here? What's your advice to people who just start companies and who are struggling to raise capital, who does not have the stamina that you have?
In fact, one of my dreams is to work with people around me and friends to start a school of entrepreneurship where we can help younger people to get into business and do it with integrity and don't have to go through so much difficulty as I've gone through. Lack of capital, lack of finance. When I started, I don't even know how to write a business plan. And I went to the bank cannot lend me money. While I was working with this multinational corporation, the bank kept coming to me saying, I want to lend me money. When I came out on my own, I went to see the same manager. The same manager would only lend me $35,000. That is after I produced a business plan, which I somehow went to a bookshop, buy a book, and learn how to write a business plan. So, and cash flow was very tight and all that. So one of my dreams actually, if we can start some kind of school of entrepreneurship where there's an incubator, there is help in finance, and then with some coaching from all experienced businessmen, then I think we can multiply the number of people who can shine as light and salt on the earth. Then our influence and impact will be greater. Otherwise, slowly out there, doesn't matter. Yeah. So my advice is that, of course, go ahead and start. I think it's an exciting journey, and trust God to help you, and He will, because you want to honor Him in the way you do things, and now God will honor you.
I just add on a bit to that. Thank you. One of the things that makes life much easier for me in politics is that I have a very good group of colleagues around me, both Christians and non-Christians. The Christians would be people like Hannah Yo, Yobi, Rajiv from Bukit Kasih, and then non-Christians, people like Tony Hua, people like David Siang, I think it is really, from a politician's standpoint, when you have a good group of people around you who can encourage you, who can perhaps show you the ropes as a new businessman or a new member of parliament, and also who can hold you accountable. If let's say they hear about certain things that you do, in terms of compromising or cutting corners or wanting to do favors in exchange for getting favors in return, these are the people who will call you to account. And because of that, I think I'm much more at ease with being in politics. And I think in business, I think that is also something that's necessary. I would really encourage you to surround yourself with colleagues who are people of integrity. They don't have to be necessarily Christians. There are a lot of non-Christians out there who have tremendous sense of integrity. And there are also, I'm sure, Christians out there who are very willing to compromise on their values. So if you can surround yourself with people, with that kind of level of integrity, and then have mentors, perhaps, people in this room. That's why I think organizations like BNP are really important for the business community. And I know that it has definitely, my own colleagues have definitely helped me walk the straight and narrow path.
It's very helpful. Look for mentors and people who hold you accountable. And Dr. Ong, your presentation, you met your President Antonio Blair is very, very instructive. That could be a story of any of us. We started off very well, but did not finish, or may not finish well. He seems to be sucked up by this demon of enough is not enough. There's always a crooked deal to make, another crooked opportunity to pursue, another crooked bridge to build. Why do you think it's so hard for men to finish well?
I would say the issue that plagues most men is ego. I don't know whether the men here would agree with me or not. Because I think we have such a big sense of self-worth, especially after becoming a Prime Minister. Stepping down from a Prime Minister, as a Prime Minister, we feel as if we still want to be as important as before. And one of the ways perhaps he has chosen to continue his influence is through his own private consulting firm. But at the same time, I think there are other options. I think the late Lee Kuan Yew gives an alternative model. He was basically, after becoming Prime Minister, stepping down as Prime Minister, he continued in some capacity giving advice. Of course, he was compensated for it, but not richly in terms of how Tony Blair has been compensated. And he still chose to live in a very frugal way. As far as I know, he did not receive any lavish appointments as a lobbyist or consultant. And his heart was very much still in giving back to Singapore. And I think if let's say we can hold on to that true cause, it probably makes it easier. But then again, none of us are former Prime Ministers, so.
Okay, and you say you can ask me that question 20 years from now. Okay. Obviously, integrity is more complex than just not stealing money or giving a bribe, right? I think you alluded to the fact that alluded to the pressure of money, sex, and power. Tony Blair's case. And to make it worse in our society, it seems that this ethical behavior and restraint being eroded systematically. You want to comment on that? Any of them?
I didn't quite catch the questions.
So integrity is more complex than just about giving bribes. So to do with money, sex, and power. Those are also issues of integrity, which my mom mentioned already. And in our society, it's quite blatant. Some of these things are being aired publicly every day. The restraining on this is getting less and less. How do we strengthen our inner resolve with all these external pressures and this eroding restraining?
I think power, money, and sex are very powerful forces. And Satan has used it very well, and repeatedly men fall because he just uses the same old tactic. So to help us to stand firm against the temptation and the lure, I think we need God's help. And you see, integrity is complex. It's not just the issue of bribery. Whether you honor your word and your character, the holiness of your life, your relationship with your family member, your spouse, your colleague. So it's multi-dimensional. And you may be successful for a while, then you just resting on a laurel and easy to fall. At the moment when you are not so, I would even look at the life of David. So we are vulnerable, but we need to be wary of all the traps along the way in this journey of life that will ultimately begin well, continue well, and end well.
Yeah, a bit more practical, in the sense that for me, I think the first area of accountability, from a daily perspective, is to my wife. We make use of modern technology. We share our calendars. So on Google, she knows exactly where I am at every point of time during the day. And then she works, so her schedule is much less unpredictable compared to mine. So at every point in time, she'll know where I am. If let's say she cannot reach me because I'm busy, she can call my assistant and find out where I am. Of course, she doesn't do that. She trusts me, the sort of like natural occurrence outflowing from that is that we must have constant discussions of the kind of challenges that we face in the office, at work, and if let's say you have your wife as your confidant, I hope she can confide in me as well. Then a lot of the other sort of temptations, money, sex, power, and all that can be kept in context. You'll be able to understand and see where those things may potentially come into your relationship. We have a same joint bank account, so if there's any weird transfers of money in and out, she'll be able to know and then ask me about it. So I think as long as there are practical steps, for us to be accountable to one another, that's I think a good starting point. But that cannot be it alone. I think all of us as Christians need to have accountability partners, outside of our marriages. It's something that I perhaps am not that regular with, but I do meet up with a couple of trusted Christian brothers on a somewhat regular basis for us to share some of our struggles and our challenges along the way. And I think the challenge is, the higher up you go, the more you are in need of these kinds of accountability structures. But the problem is, the higher up you go, the less accountable you want to be to people. So it's something that all of us have to be aware of.
Well, thank you for the practical tips and insight. I think the wives are all very happy to hear that. And all the wives say, that's so practical, so good. Yeah, very encouraging. Now here's a question from Dr. Kevin Wu. Says, this is addressed to you, Ming. If politics as a whole is a reflection of society, as you said earlier, how do you see Malaysian society as of today? How do you see the Malaysian politics society moving forward? Will they move up or down from the level of 52? That's the transparency. You have to put on the prophetic line.
I think Malaysian society is very complex, because of, and I found that we are even more complex than I originally thought after becoming a member of parliament. The reason why I say that is because I've been exposed to parts of society that normally, previously in my sort of like middle class PJ existence, that I wasn't really exposed to. So, for example, the different Sertuan or Chinese organizations in different places, especially in the new village. Some of them have backgrounds which considered a little bit on the hate side or the not so legitimate side, if you will. And then there's also a lot of sort of like different Muslim groups out there, different religious groups out there, different different NGOs from all walks of life, and all of them have a different sort of like appeal to you. All of them want something from you. All of them have different needs and so forth. So from that standpoint, I think Malaysian society is really complex, and we are divided in many ways, which means that national unity, that elusive national unity, is actually very hard to achieve. On the issue of integrity and corruption, I've also found that people always make exceptions for themselves. What do I mean by this? I have a lot of cases of people coming to me and saying, wow, I really hate what's happening in the country. There's all this 1MDB scandal, blah blah blah, this and that. Malaysia is getting more corrupt. Oh, by the way, can you write a letter of appeal to me to the local council so that some of these fines can be waived? I'm just giving one of many examples. The exception is always with me as an individual, and me meaning the person that comes to you. And I think many of us are like that as well. Yes, the system is very bad, but for me, can you make an exception? I think that's something that we should not agree to. I've tried my best to resist those things, which, you know, is tied into the reputational issue just now. Whenever I write a letter of support, I must make sure that I can stand by this. If it ever goes, goes into the public sphere, I can explain, look, this is the reason why I think this is something that was worth supporting. Not to ask people to have their fines waived and things like that. I think those things are much less acceptable for politicians to do. And lastly, I think that it's incumbent for politicians as well as business leaders, even though society may tolerate corruption, as leaders, we should lead the way in terms of showing the country a different way of doing things in our businesses, in politics. It does not. We may not necessarily have to shout from the top of the roof. We are anti-corruption all the time. It can be very small things like what Nehemiah does in terms of the printing of his cards. It can be us advocating on issues which are important to the country that increase transparency, but in a way that doesn't necessarily say that, we are anti-corruption. We are anti-corruption, but there are many ways to try to address this issue from different angles, and I think we should try to lead as much as possible as leaders.
Thank you. This is a question, I don't know who wrote this, no name. Anyway, I read it. It says, I'm working for a multinational company and my work deals with contractors, consultants and engineers who once paid to secure business deal or when lobbying for contracts. My company has a policy of strictly no bribery, but I'm still caught in this cycle as I'm responsible for getting the sales contract for my company. What's your advice to deal with this situation? I think it's obviously directed to you.
I'm not very clear. The company that he's looking for have this don't pay bribe policy, or the company, which company that is required?
That's right.
Even for LLC, that
the company doesn't pay bribe, but he can't get
jobs.
Can't get job, and he can't accomplish his sales targets on his contracts.
Yeah, I sympathize with you because I face that problem all the time.
So your advice is quit inside the own company.
You just need to persevere and resourceful and keep banging your head until you get through. And that's why I said by God's grace that I managed to somehow able to do it.
Here's a follow-up question from Peter Tan, who was formerly head of Blue Ocean. He says, is it easier to keep your integrity when you are the boss as compared to being an employee? What have you maintained integrity when under pressure? So I think Peter's under pressure now. Please help him.
Actually, as an employee, it might be easier because let's say you don't want to bribe, your boss instruct you to bribe, you just do it, boss instruction, you pass to do it to the boss. I'm not responsible for my decision.
I get one.
Well, I think that is how you rationalize enough. Whereas, you see, as a boss, if you can tell the staff don't bribe, and actually when you come to the crunch, you bribe. Whatever you say about your name card, whatever you advertise, everything you do is good to punish too. Because when the tire hits the road, what you actually decide whether you bribe or not bribe is the account. So I would think that if you are the boss in the company, you have to set an example. It's just that this country, I'm not a politician, but I can give a real comment. I'm very pessimistic because, like I said, firstly, corruption is a low risk, high return venture, and then the wrong start at the top. As long as the top don't set the example, you don't catch the big fish, it's very hard to solve the problem. You can introduce new law and all that, but the new law doesn't apply to the people in power. So we are the small fry to do all this sort of thing. I think that, I mean, some are very pessimistic. The incremental improve very little. But if the country leader really catch the big fish and make them pay for it, that means it's become a high risk, low return venture. Then you can begin to address the problem. Or you consider not at all.
I just want to give a related example. I think the issue of integrity and corruption, doesn't just, it's just not restricted to the issue of giving and paying money. And on the issue of setting the example from the top, one of the issues that I raised quite early when, as a member of parliament is the issue of degree mills. We are an education institution now, so the importance of having a legitimate degree from a legitimate university, having gone through that process, is something that, as an academic, I'm very, very concerned about and very, very careful about. So I asked a question in Parliament. What action does the government take against civil servants who have degrees, fake degrees, or degrees from degree mills? So the minister listed out all these processes by which they can take discipline action against people who have all these degree mills and whatnot. So in response, I asked the minister, this is the kind of standards you set for the civil servants. These are the kind of actions that you want to take against them. But you have two ministers in your bench who not only have one but two degrees from degree mills. One of them, I will name them publicly. I'm not afraid of being sued here because I've repeated this outside the House of Parliament. The Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, ironically, a UN graduate, has two fake degrees, including a fake doctorate. The Minister of Human Resources, again, ironically, also has two fake degrees. His master's as well as his undergraduate degree from degree mills. Right? So, after I said this and I accused them, in Parliament and outside, one of them got very angry with me, the other one just shut up. The only thing that he did was, he took down his academic qualifications, where he got his PhD from his website. That's all. But he still maintained that he's a doctor. So if this kind of thing were to have happened in the United States or in any developed country, that person would have resigned the next day or even that evening itself. But in Malaysia, these two guys are still not just members of parliament, but ministers. That's why the rot starts at the top. When you tolerate this kind of behavior right at the top, everyone else at the bottom would say that, look, you have no right to criticize me, the minister is doing the same.
Okay. So, moral stories, get your degree from UCS. But by the way, he didn't pay me any commission. Brother Chong, you're so eager to speak. Please, this is our international arbitrator.
Oh, it's on. Well, I'm not exactly in the business arena, but I used to be in it, and I know Chee's predicament very well. I was in a much corrupted construction industry in Malaysia, but I chose to move out of the construction industry into an area of dispute resolution. Now, I would like to preface my story by relating to one incident when an outright judge facing two parties, and here you have a very lawyers who think that since this judge is an very upright judge, the way to win the case is to make him feel that he's repulsed by somebody trying to bribe him. So he sent him a case of very fine wine. And the other party's lawyers think the same way. Also sent him a case of fine wine, and he declared in open court that he received these two cases of wine from the two counsel, and he would be fair. Because both sides has bribed him. Now, the point I'm trying to stress is, bribery is rampant in the business arena. But there are one area that you probably would not have known. or you knew about it but very hesitating in saying things about it. It's in the dispute resolution industry. The judiciary, for example, and today I just read a news article who said that Anwar Ibrahim's trial, a new book is coming out by this Mark Trowell, QC, who has written a book called The Prosecution Story, The Last Chapter. Now he is going to relate how our judiciary has treated the case of Anwar Ibrahim on a very objective and legal way. I think one of the biggest problems in this country is, on one hand, our judiciary said we are pro-business. On the other hand, they have cases that is obviously seen to be biased. You all know about it, the Allah case. I was in one of the discussions with the group of lawyers on Allah case. It is outright. You can see that they have made up their mind. They have made up their mind. They say as a Muslim, they cannot do anything other than that. But that's the point, you know. So I want to find out from you. It is very easy for us who has not become successful to be very godly and to be very upright. But once we have become very successful, it's a different story. I know of one arbitrator, international arbitrator. That is a true international arbitrator. I'm not. He became so successful. His name is called Yusuf Ho. He's a British and became a Malaysian. Married a Malay and called himself Yusuf Ho. And he was charged for corruptions. And how he was charged for corruptions? Because he solicited from two parties. See, whoever can pay him the amount, he will rule in his favor. And this is even more potent than giving even 100,000. This is talking about millions, tens of millions. And we are dealing with dispute, not 100,000, we are dealing with dispute that can run in hundreds of millions. So could you give us some pointers actually how to hold your position so that you would not, once you become successful, all the value systems are all out of the windows, and suddenly we find that we've been prosecuted for corruption.
Thank you, John, for your long and interesting input. Will you comment?
I think, thankfully, I'm not at that level where the temptation is so strong that I cannot resist. God knows my limit. I think maybe He doesn't want to give me that kind of success. And I'm thankful for that. So, in the Bible, you talk about 1 talent man, 5 talent man, and 10 talent man. Maybe God knows that I can manage only 1 talent, and 1 talent, and I'm satisfied with it. So I'm sure when you are at a higher level, the temptation is a lot stronger and the issue are a lot more complex and it's very difficult. I have no advice to you as how to do it because I am not in that position. But I want to quickly go back to something just now. I'm pessimistic at the same time. There is some ray of hope. I know there are some, like this friend of mine, he's a Muslim, very upright man, very humble, and he is, in fact, I don't mind telling you, he was the former Director General of Malaysia Highway Authority, and he's absolutely clean. So there are bright spots in this country as well, and it's a case where during his daughter's wedding, the contractor, out of gratitude, wanted to give him a big compound. You look at Ambao, he take $50, return the rest to the contractor. And that's how clean he is. So there are still rays of hope. So sometimes you bang your head until suddenly you find there's an open door, then you can still do your business with integrity without having to try. Yeah, so we just want to give you some ray of hope to be not so pessimistic. Malaysia, comparatively, let's say you compare India, I tell you, India, my head bleed until I don't know how. I'm coming back already. I'm going to continue the business there.
I don't know whether this is a ray of hope or pessimism, but related to the example, there was a deputy DG of customs who, as far as I know, I've met the son, was a man of integrity. He was investigating a car smuggling syndicate from Langkawi, and this thing actually happens in Malaysia much more often than one would like to realize. Most of you in this room would not have heard of him, but during the 2013 general election, during the campaign itself, he was murdered, shot in the head twice, while on his way to work in Putrajaya. This is, a very high-ranking customs official. So the positive thing is that this is a man of integrity, but the negative thing is that even though he is of that high-ranking level, so far, as far as I know, I don't think anyone has been the high-ups involving in this criminal syndicate has not really been captured yet, or really being hammered. So I think this is an example of how the kind of challenges that we have in Malaysia. On your question, Sir Chong, of what we can do, I think herein lies the situation whereby it is not an individual's effort any longer. It is about building good institutions and building good checks and balances. Because we want to have a system whereby the institutional framework is such that the good judges get promoted, the honest judges get promoted, the good civil servants get promoted. And as far as I can tell, currently in Malaysia, that is not really happening because the institutions have been eroded over time. The quality of some of these institutions have been eroded over time. I think one of the people that has to take responsibility for it is Dr. Mahathir, right? And because of these kind of institutional safeguards that are lacking, you have people that have risen to the top not because of necessarily of their ability, but because they have rubbed the right political shoulders, they have said the right things to appease the political masters, right? So I think this is one area whereby we have to fight. We meaning the coalition that are part of to try to strengthen those kinds of institutions. We still have good institutions in this country. I think Bank Negara is one example where I think the integrity of the institution has held up relatively well over the years. I think the Securities Commission, by and large, I think is one of the better institutions in this country. But I can't say the same for the rest. And I really take my hat off to the former LLM chairman, the Warga Lebuh Raya, having dealt with some of the people in this government authority. I know that the kind of contracts and power that you have here is really, really immense. We're talking about hundreds of millions and billions of dollars worth of contracts. It's not easy to do, but we have to try to fight it.
Most of the institutions are tainted, but they are good people. Like, for example, MACC, we all relate that to Joe Bing Hawk's case, but I've been told that some MACC people are very frustrated that their efforts were not taken to the highest level, and they make strategic leaks to the foreign press. But a little bit more on this, pursuing the same line. This is a question by Jackson Ho, who is a business owner, but just the question of what are remedial redress or mechanisms in which we can complain or a whistleblower mechanism that we can, existing mechanism that we can pursue from your point of view. And with that we will take this as the last question.
There is something called the Whistleblowers Protection Act, but the problem with this act is that you cannot make whatever accusations that you have public. You have to go and report it to MACC and a small group of people who can protect you. And I think currently the way the act stands is that you may not necessarily trust the institutions that you're reporting it to. So it goes back to my question of the credibility of some of these institutions. There is an alternative. If let's say you see that there's wrongdoing in the system, I would say that a more practical alternative is for you to approach some of the NGOs who can raise these issues up and protect your identity at the same time, or perhaps some politicians that you trust who can highlight these issues without compromising your own identity. And I think this is something that's really important because many politicians will want to seek publicity for these issues without necessarily seeking the protection or right kind of protection for the person who wants to leak these kinds of information. So you really need to find somebody that you can trust who have your interests at heart as their first priority, and then only second priority is to find the best way to highlight the kind of issues that you want to raise because of the information you have as an insider.
Well, thank you. With that, we'll conclude that we're inspired today that you can succeed with integrity, although it's challenging, and we all want to end well, not only start well. But if we should also look to God for divine intervention, although not just on our human level. And cumulatively, we all play a little part, we'll get this change. But it begins with ourselves. So with that, thank you so much for this distinguished panel of speakers. I'd like to give them a thunderous round of applause. All right, we'll ask Mark to come up here to make some announcement and then close for us. Then we'll have a high tea and networking. Thank you.
All right. Did you enjoy that? Yes. Turn to your neighbor and say, I learned something. Or did you just say, when is the food going to be served? You look hungry. All right, I just have some very quick announcements. If you have enjoyed this forum, the good news is we're going to have another forum for you. And it's going to be held, as you see in your bulletin here, on the 27th of June. And we have another interesting topic called character or competence, which is more critical in building long-term success. You see, over here we're trying to deal with a lot of tough issues, right? We both know that character and competence are important, but which comes first? How many of you think that character is more important? Okay, very slowly going on. Okay, what about competence? Okay, the rest of you really need to come for this forum because you're not sure. And we have amazing speakers, and these are people who walk the talk. And they are David Ong, the owner and founder of Rickfield Properties. You know, if you're into property investment, the chances of you buying from a Rickfield agent is very high, right? They are 30 years in the industry. And also Srida Subramaniam, CEO of Asian Broadcasting Network. Without ABN, you won't have your Astro channels and your radio channels and so on. So these are your two key speakers that are going to come. It's only 30 ringgit. I know you paid 25 ringgit for this, but we didn't increase the price because of GST. It's just to cover the cost, but this is the introduction price, okay? So this is what we're going to do. And apart from just having this business forum, I just would like to make an announcement that we're also going to start small groups, work-life groups in your offices so that we can discuss in a more intimate way, and so that we can ask specific questions and address certain issues that you might be facing at work with regards to some of these topics. Okay? Right. So with that, we have one last thing to do. There's evaluation form on your table. So we would really appreciate it if you could give us your honest feedback so that we can improve on the next forum, and also we can address some of the things that you would like to know, you would like to hear. So please give us your honest feedback, and you can just leave it on the table. We collect it at the end. So I'll give you about 2 to 3 minutes to quickly fill it up. And after this, we'll have a time of networking, and the food is served at the back. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to give thanks for the food, and then we can continue on with the networking session. Father, we give thanks for the food, and we pray that you bless it to the nourishment of the body. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, why don't we just give our speakers another round of applause. So please, people around, we have food at the back, and please grab your food and sit down and start to network and enjoy the rest of the evening. Okay, thank you very much.